Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session of IIP Talks, organized by International Institute of Psychoanalysis, IIP. My name is Manali, and I'll be your host for this gathering. I'm a student of psychoanalysis and a part of this year's formation at the IIP. I am a practicing psychotherapist in India and a researcher. And for those who can't see me, I'm wearing black frame specs, have black hair, and I'm wearing a white top. IIP Talks is a space for critical and contemporary reflections in psychoanalysis. Thank you for joining us today. We were meant to have two speakers, Silvia Lippi and Tatiana Gomes. Unfortunately, Tatiana will not be joining us today because of health concerns. We wish them a full recovery and they will record their talk soon so that we can share it with all of you. Just to introduce them briefly, Tatiana Gomes is a psychologist specialized in psychoanalysis and neuropsychoanalysis, non-binary, autistic, LGBT activist, and a professional focused on neuroaffirmative care practices. They're dedicated to studying autism, psychosis, and gender issues. That said, we're so honored to be joined by Silvia Lippi today. Silvia Lippi is of Italian origin with a background in philosophy. She's a psychoanalyst and holds a PhD in psychology. She's currently a practicing analyst at Space Analytic, a hospital psychologist at the Public Health Institution of Barthélemy Durand, and an associate researcher at the University of Paris. Among her publications are Marx, Lacan. I'll try to pronounce this as best as I can because it's in French and I don't speak French. Amongst her publications are Marx, Lacan, L'acte Revolutionary, L'acte Analytique, The Decision of Desire, Transgressions, Bartali, Lacan. Sylvia can correct me later. A warm
Don't
thank
worry.
you.
Yeah, go to the last one. Go directly to the last one. Don't worry.
So these were just some of the publications amongst the other publications, which we'll let you know more about. A warm thank you as well to our interpreters, Fernanda, translating French and Portuguese, and Maya, translating Portuguese and English. We're also joined by Ched Wilson, psychoanalyst and professor of the next formation, who will be today's mediator and lead the discussion after Sylvia's talk. Now, I would like to invite Benoit, psychoanalyst, founder, and director of IIP, to present the psychoanalytic formations of the IIP. Benoit, I open to you. The floor is yours.
Muito obrigado, Manali. Muito obrigado,
Thank you
Manali.
so
Bom
much,
dia a
Manali.
todos,
Good
todos.
morning, good
Muito
evening,
feliz de
good
estar aqui com
afternoon to all
vocês.
of you. I'm very
É
happy
uma
to
honra
be here with you.
para
It's
mim
an
aqui
honor
estar
to be here
na presença de vocês, na
in your
presença da Silvia,
presence, in the presence of
Lippi.
Silvia
É uma honra
Lippi.
para mim.
It's an honor for me.
Gente, muito rapidamente,
Just
o
very
Instituto
quickly, the
Internacional de Psicanálise
International
e
Institute
a
of
gente quis compartilhar
Psychoanalysis,
isso
the
com vocês,
IIP,
vai abrir
is going to
duas novas
open
formações
2
em
new
setembro
formations in
2025.
September
Quem
2025.
tem um interesse vai
If you are
poder ver, a
interested,
gente vai
you will
colocar
be able
link
to
no
check out our
bate-papo.
link in
Uma
the
formação
chat.
aberta para
It's a
todo mundo,
formation open for anyone.
vai trabalhar os fundamentos
We're going to work
da
on the
psicanálise.
foundations of
Uma formação que vai
psychoanalysis,
ser
and another
aberta
formation that
aqueles que já
is
têm uma
open to
experiência
those who
clínica. A
already
gente
have
vai trabalhar
clinical
bastante a questão da
experience. We're
técnica,
going to
da técnica
work on the
psicanalítica.
technique,
Essas formações, a partir
psychoanalytic
da
technique.
orientação, a
And
partir da
these
especificidade do
formations are
IIP,
based on the
que
specificities
tem
of
esse
the
desejo
IIP that has this
de
desire
construir, participar da
to
construção do estudo
participate
de
in
uma
the
psicanálise
construction of a study
aberta,
of an open
descolonial,
psychoanalysis,
internacional, em várias
decolonialized,
línguas.
international, in several
É isso,
languages.
é isso. É
Yeah, and
aberta
that's
para
it.
as
It's
minorias e as
an
pessoas
open to
minorizadas. É
minorities,
isso, Amanali.
minorized peoples. That's it, Manali.
Thank you, Benoit. And now it's my pleasure to give the floor to Silvia Lippi. Hi, Silvia. Thank you for being with us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So Everybody hear me? Pardon, je rentre en français. Donc, c'est magnifique, je dois dire, d'être avec vous. Je suis évidemment très
So
touchée
it's
par
amazing to be here with
le fait
you.
que la
I'm
psychanalyse
very
existe
much touched by the
dans tous les coins
fact
du
that
monde. Et
psychoanalysis
je crois vraiment
exists
qu'il faut vraiment
everywhere around the
la
world.
détacher de cette centralité
And I think we have
européenne,
to
française.
separate it
Ça, moi,
from
j'avais un
this
peu détaché quand j'ai
European
commencé à travailler
French
pas mal beaucoup en
centrality.
Italie. Mais
I
disons que je pense que
already
c'est vraiment le
dislocated
futur
it a
de
little
notre
bit because I
discipline
work
d'être
in
vraiment
Italy a
dans le
lot,
reste du monde.
but I think it's the
Et
future
bon,
of our
donc
discipline
aujourd'hui,
is in the rest of the world.
j'aimerais bien vous parler disons,
Today,
d'un aspect
I like to
qui m'est
talk
très
to
au
you
cœur,
about an
c'est-à-dire
aspect
les
that is very
rapports
important to me
entre les
personally,
singuliers et les
the
collectifs
relationship between the
par rapport
singular
à
and the
notre
collective
clinique psychanalytique.
regarding
Je veux dire
our
pourquoi dire clinique parce qu'il
psychoanalytic clinic.
ne s'agit pas d'avoir un
I
discours
make
sur
a
le
point
collectif
of
porté
saying
par
the
des
word
psychanalystes,
clinic
à le croire ou
because
point,
it's not a
mais
matter of
d'essayer de
having a
voir comment dans la
discourse of
pure travail
having a
social
discourse
nous
about the
pouvons
collective and taking
renverser
it to psychoanalysis,
singulier et
but how
collectif
we can work in an
doivent
inverted way,
désormais
the singular
être
and the
pensés ensemble.
collective,
Doivent, entre guillemets, évidemment.
they should
Disons,
be thought of
ma
together.
recherche va vers comment penser ensemble
My research
les
goes in this
singuliers, les
direction. How
radicalement
can we
singuliers,
think about the singular,
et
the
les collectifs.
radically singular,
J'ai
and
mis,
the
je
collective
voudrais citer tout
together?
de suite en exergue une
I'd like to
phrase d'une
quote
philosophe
immediately a
d'origine
phrase
italienne qui est
of
très connue ici
an
aux États-Unis.
Italian
Et c'est une
philosopher.
phrase
She's
vraiment très
very well
importante
known. She
qui
came to
servira
the
peut-être
United States.
de
It's a
point de
very
départ
important phrase
pour cette
that will serve
rencontre.
as a
Alors,
starting point
le
for
corps se
this
trouve
encounter of
sur notre
ours.
route dès qu'il
The
est
body,
question des changements sociaux. Hein.
the
Donc,
body
disons, c'est
finds
encore une
itself on
fois,
the
c'est
road
intéressant parce
that
que les
has to
corps,
do with
hein,
social
sera
change.
vraiment
One
le
more
point de
time,
conversation
it's
entre
important
le singulier et le collectif.
that the
Et
body
c'est
is the
là que je
point
suis
of
allée aujourd'hui, ce
intercession
matin,
between the singular
pour
and
avoir
the
une
collective.
exposition au Centre
And this
Pompidou à Paris,
morning,
où il y
I
a une
went to see
exposition
an
vraiment
exhibit in the
extraordinaire
Pompidou in a
de
museum in
Tillmans.
Paris that had an
Et
extraordinary
partout,
photographic
hein, ça écrit, il y a aussi
exhibition.
une chanson
And
qui porte
everywhere I
la vidéo,
looked,
des vidéos avec des photos à lui.
and
Il y a une phrase qui est Your
there were
corps
videos
is
with
yours.
photographs, and there was a
C'est très
phrase that
intéressant
said,
aussi, hein, parce que Your corps, ça
"Your
signifie
body is
ton corps est à
yours.
toi.
Your
On dirait que ton corps est à
your
toi,
body
ça va
is
de soi,
yours."
parce que ton corps est à toi. Eh bien,
Well,
évidemment,
we
je
know that
insiste
already, right?
sur
Your
ce terme,
body is
ça veut dire
yours.
que
But
ce
the
n'est pas vrai
fact that
que ton
he
corps va à
insists
toi,
on this
que,
term,
que ça va de soi que
core,
le corps soit à toi.
in French,
Mais disons,
it,
pour commencer,
he points to the
je
fact
voudrais
that it's not
aussi
simply so that
préciser
our
que,
body
disons,
is ours. It's more complex
il y
than
a
that.
quelques
And
années,
I'd also like
en France,
to
Paul Preciado
say
lançait un
that a
discours
few
dans une
years
grande
ago in
association de
France,
psychanalyse. Paul Preciado, le
um,
philosophe,
there was this
et
speech
il
taken,
a
this
évidemment appelé
philosopher,
une psychanalyse
I missed his
forte,
name,
hein,
sorry,
c'est
I'll
comme
pick it
ça
up
qu'il s'est
later.
intervenu
He
son
gave a
message,
gift
alors que les psychanalystes
speech
sont
to
pensés de façon différente
psychoanalysts. This is how
que la
I heard his
psychanalyse. Moi, je le
message.
considère comme
He
un appel,
said
c'est-à-dire
that
venez avec
he,
nous, ou alors vous
I
allez
heard
tout
it
seul
as
dans
a
votre coin et la
convocation.
psychanalyse va mourir dans son coin européen,
You either
français.
come with us or you're going to
Et moi,
stay
j'ai pris au
isolated.
sérieux son
Psychoanalysis is going to
appel.
be
Et
isolated if you don't
disons
come with us. I
que
took
je
this
pense
convocation very
que
seriously,
la question trans, au mieux,
and I
les
think
transitions
that
des
the
genres
trans
que nous avons
issue,
rencontrées dans nos cabinets, que nous
gender
rencontrons,
transition that we
sont
find
vraiment
in our clinical practice,
disons, les
these
points de départ
transitions
pour
are a starting
repenser
point
la psychanalyse aujourd'hui.
for us
Je
to
pense que non
rethink
seulement cet
psychoanalysis
appel de
today.
Preciado, mais tout ce qui va avec son travail et le travail, encore une fois,
I
des
don't, this convocation by
trans-studies ou
Preciado
studies,
uh,
nous permettent encore une fois de repenser la
allows
psychanalyse
us one
d'un
more
point de vue
time
théorique et
to
d'un point de vue
rethink
clinique.
psychoanalysis
Et
from the
la
theoretical
première
point of
chose
view.
que j'ai appris avec de mes patients et patientes
The
trans,
first thing that I learned
c'est
with
que
my
les mouvements
patients, with
collectifs
my trans patients,
sont très
is that
importants
the
pour ces personnes.
collective movements are
Dans
very
ma
important for these
clinique, je peux
people,
voir que la plupart de mes patients et
for
patientes
these
trans
patients. For the most
sont
part,
engagés
my
politiquement
trans patients
et militent pour
are
défendre les
very much
droits de leur
engaged
communauté et
politically.
pour
They're
d'autres causes
militants,
d'ailleurs,
they're activists
partagées
in their
par d'autres
communities,
communautés.
and for other causes as well, shared by other communities, for example, feminist causes, racial, ecological causes, etc. So I'm going to repeat the question. How can we think today about the collective from the point of view of psychoanalysis? Of course, there's a psychoanalytical theory of groups developed by Freud, especially in mass psychology, where Freud explains very precisely, I believe, of a certain social bond or links, connections. They group around a phallus, a paternal figure, and they become a mass that is moved by an ideal. This is a modality that exists for us to form a bond, a social bond. We can think about fascism that unfortunately is back in many countries. It's something that's very I'm going quite quickly here because it's not what my topic is about, but this is a form of social bond that can take place. And of course, a great part of psychoanalysis are still convinced that all collectives are a mass, that there is only one modality. We either have the singular, the individual, the subject that goes to the clinic by themselves, that they go to see a psychoanalyst, and opposite to that, we would have a mass or collective that is necessarily destined to become a fascist mass, for example. So we can say that LGBTQIPN plus communities or feminist communities that are interested in social issues, are they all organized in this form unconsciously? So let's think about the LGBTQIPN community. I reduced the number of letters to make it make it easier to pronounce in French. Do they have a common ideal, or is there something different that unites them? And my hypothesis is that there is something else that joins them, that gathers them, which is the body, a traumatized body, or in other words, touched by trauma. It's the fact of being submitted to a trauma, having suffered a trauma, in a singular form. Trauma is a singular notion in psychoanalysis. It's what I think we have an open mic. Yes, yeah. It's an open mic, sorry. So I was talking about trauma. Trauma is an event, an experience that is lived by an individual. And of course, there's something very, very singular about it. It's the most radically singular thing is trauma. Socially, of course, we can talk about collective traumas, why not? But from the psychoanalytical point of view, this term does not make a lot of sense because each person has their own way of dealing with the trauma that they experience. So the idea is, based on this experienced trauma, socially experienced trauma, because we are concentrating on social issues primarily, based on this trauma, the subject is going to invent a singular way of inventing this. The body is going to invent it. And this body that reinvents it and finds solutions based on what they experienced, they could then create a social bond without touching on the ideal, on the phallus, on the idealization of the father. That's the first hypothesis. The second hypothesis is it possible to talk about the identity of the body? Body, I'm not talking about the anatomical body. I'm not talking about the narcissistic image of the body, of what we are, but an instrument fight. Following Federici, it's the idea that this body is an instrument for to fight, to struggle. And I would say that this formation, I would say that like Marx, that this incarnation can happen thanks to the symptom. And for Lacan, Marx invented the symptom. So I need to explain first what we understand by symptom. Why am I citing Marx? Because Marx insisted not simply on the idea of becoming aware of your own words that allow you to have a revolution, but it's something much more deep, which is the body in suffering. That allows you to have a revolution. So Marx invented the symptom as a body in suffering, which begins the revolt. So a symptom for psychoanalysis is not a disorder that you have to eliminate. It's, of course, it can be bothersome, it can upset you. A lot of patients come to us, especially because of the symptom that bothers them a lot. So I always have a sore throat. I have, etc. Any kind of situation, phobias, anorexia, situations that bother the subject, that upset them, that always perpass the body. It can be quite upsetting. Why? Because each time that a symptom presents itself or represents itself in Freudian theory, it is always a manifestation of trauma a posteriori. If we can't go back to the traumatic experience, the originary experience, of course we can remember it, recall it, but we cannot be sure about what happened at the psychic and corporal level. How did the subject experience their trauma? Just to give an example, after I published my book, Sisters for a Psychoanalytical Psychoanalysis, it's going to be published in English soon. I think in 2026 it's going to be translated into Portuguese as well. It's already been translated, actually. The patients who suffered trauma or sexual abuse, they come to me and they say, I don't remember. I know something happened, but I don't know exactly what happened. It doesn't mean that they're fantasizing or inventing things like some psychoanalysts have reactionary psychoanalysis, as I call them, who do not want to hear this in a hetero-patriarchal world that is in crisis. We have to listen to them, and they show us to what extent the experience happened. It's difficult to explain this. What I usually say is that the symptom always has the experience of the trauma that repeats itself. That's why we can't decide just to stop a bulimic crisis, a classic angst crisis. We can't just decide, oh, I'm not going to have it anymore. The symptom is a posteriori of the trauma. It comes after the trauma. The trauma is this empty space where we don't really know what happened. I'm repeating this. This has nothing to do with the fact, but at the psychic level, we don't know what happened. And the only proof that we have of this trauma is the repetition of the symptom. But what does this have to do? What does this mean, symptom? It's something that bothers the subject, but it can also be transformed and transformed in the body that sustains him, that supports him. And all the analytical work, what analytical work does is to transform the psychic suffering, not eradicating the symptom, because that's impossible in a certain way. It's impossible. because there's this indelible trace of the trauma that will always be there, but we can transform the symptom. Lacan said about the end of analysis is the identification with the symptom. It's interesting to think of this. Identification means that there's a modality of traumatic response with which the subject cannot that the subject cannot dominate, cannot intervene directly, but they can change the format and not make it as toxic. I don't know, maybe a bulimic woman who becomes, this is a silly example, but a woman who becomes used to this drive, how can I say this?
Prendre les aliments partout peut devenir une grande chercheuse. Donc, la
So she can,
voracité peut l'avoir dans la lecture
the same voracity that she has for the food, she can have this voracity for reading books, for example, become a researcher. The symptom is, so the end of analysis is when the symptom is not as problematic and upsetting to the subject. It's a happy symptom, so to say. It's a symptom that allows the subject to be inscribed in a social bond. This is the most important point. Deep down, each one of us lives in the world and participates in the world based on some kind of symptom. There's always something in the body that does not function very well, but in the happy transformation of this symptom, a successful transformation, it can become, it can make it so that the subject finds a way, adaptable way, or a happy way to become part of the world. When becoming part of the world becomes collective engagement, that's my thesis. It's the apotheosis. I forgot how to translate this word. Apotheosis. It's a transformation that is of something that is manufactured by hand, like an artisan. Each person can do this singularly, but also having a social collective bond and engagement in the social. Regarding this example of a symptom that comes from a militant collective experience, I'm going to use, for example, a movie by Isabelle Soares, which is called Our Bodies Are Your Battlefields. I think this premiered in a lot of countries. I imagine that in Brazil as well, because it was filmed in Argentina in several transgender communities. The movie came out in 2022, and it shows with great delicacy that in the life of trans people, the collective and the singular are intertwined, are absolutely intertwined, and it goes through the body. So that's my hypothesis, that the invention of this modality of gender is inseparable from militant activity, and so the body, the transgender body also becomes a body for the feminist fight. It's a way of thinking how to putting together the minorities working with each other. And there's a beautiful song by Yoko Ono. Women are the niggers of the world. So when we are in a position that we are submitted to a dominant heteropatriarchal phallic position, we are talking about our traumatic position. We are not in an ideal, we are not in a monolithic ideal. Above all, because this form of traumatic collective, they take on they take on all differences. We don't have to be the same sex, we don't have to be the same gender, the same color, the same race, the same social position. There's something in this collective that inscribes difference into this collective. So this Italian philosopher talks about multitudes, which is a term used by anarchists worldwide, and it allows you to see how multitudes always take into account singularity. So a multitude is a multitude because you cannot separate it from the impasse of singularity. So when you think about these movements, if you think about singularity in terms of the phallic collective, then the singular is erased, it's repressed to reinforce gender identity, which is what I'm defending here. Gender identity is not identity. This is what I defend. It goes much deeper. It has to do with body and suffering, which is what I call the symptom, suffering body. This movie, Isabella Soa's body, our bodies are your battlefield. So she follows several transvestites, that's what she calls them in the movie. The movie shows that far from leading to a standardization of bodies, the transgender movement emphasizes that each person should find their own way of expressing in the world. So you can see how the collective and the singular can be thought of together. So you've understood this already, right? Especially through the body that is traversed by trauma, a body that is singular, a body that has a symptom. And I'm going to insist on this symptom. I'm not talking about something that is evil, something that is ordinary psychiatry. I'm talking about something deeper, thinking about possible transformations and even happy transformations. The issue of the body is central to the movie, but instead of focusing on anatomy, she focuses on the encounter of different trans people, but united in the collective fight. It's a beautiful movie. The protagonist comes from a lower social rank in society. The other is a teacher. Each one of them, and one with another, they find a way to be together strongly based on their own singular traumas transformed into a collective symptom. So these bodies function as a symbolic emblem as what is at stake in the fight, in the struggle. Their bodies are what is at stake. So each singularly traumatized body has its own history and is an integral part of the collective body, of the fight in the present. What is passive in the wound becomes active in militancy. When I have patients who talk about abuse that they suffered, when they denounce this, trans patients, for example, my patients are usually very engaged in militancy, when they express themselves, they are never victims. There is a victimization by feminists, people say that they victimize themselves, but it's the opposite. When they report this trauma that they experience, that's when they go from passive to the active of militancy. And my practice has shown this very strongly. All my colleagues who work with trans people, the few that still trust psychoanalysis and with whom we want to think of a new psychoanalysis, the fact that they are not alone, that their bodies are not alone in their suffering, this changes completely the way of these analysants to fight together and to talk together. The fact that there is this other means that they are not alone with their own trauma. Like the first people trans people in history, they were alone with their shame, with their fear. And of course, the first women who went to see Freud, right? So there's this community between trans people and some women, because in the beginning they were by themselves. Only the psychoanalysts listened to them. But then, so the women were started to speak with Freud. And when they start to speak, singular and collective lives change. The battlefield can be understood in the movie as a place for engagement. And this is what I'm going to try to show you, because psychoanalysis itself has to be militant if it doesn't want to die off, I think. I'm going to insist on the fact that the director thinks that the body is the place where the battlefield takes place. The body expresses the malaise of the gender in the body. As I said, with the other collectivities, with masses, we forget the body in favor of the ideal and of a thought that allows us to emphasize narcissism. Here it's the opposite. The body can live. We give space for the traumatized body to exist with others. So instead of the opposition of the body and the battlefield is the body of the trans person. So it means that the battlefield are in the bodies, and the movie allows us to ask ourselves about this position. We also see in this movie that being a woman is not an anatomical determinism. I think nowadays this is more established amongst people, at least in the milieu that I frequent. And it's not a privilege that can be attributed by birth. I'm talking about trans feminist women or trans women. So we see that there is desire to fight together outside of this paradigm, the psychic and anatomical paradigm. So this movie is truly something that my book is something that I was able to develop based on what I saw in my clinical practice. So the desire to be a woman by these trans individuals is not inseparable, or it's not inseparable from the desire to fight together, regardless of their political orientation, race, etc. We see in manifestations different colors, and LGBTQIPN plus equals difference. So So once again, this allows us to find new subjectivities based on the difference that is integral part of the group. The groups are heterogeneous, as I said in the movie, and the struggle, the fight of feminist and transgender persons who belong to the Me Too movement, for example, in Latin American countries, it had a different name. They had a convergence of facts against a common adversary. So, what is the role of the unconscious in this polarization of a feminist desire? We can think that this would be irreconcilable, that political militancy is not being fostered by an ideal of superpotency. I'm saying this because there was an article by Millet who said, she said the title in French, I'm sorry. Once again, he talks about the first hysterical women that Freud saw who were by themselves in his clinic, and what a pity that they were by themselves, because militancy could be a form for them to empower themselves. It's not of the phallic order that we are trying that we are talking about, but it's the ability to change the modalities of social bonds. This bond of solidarity that happens among trans women and feminist women is not phallic or fraternal. It's of the order of sorority. So I would say that sorority is, as I already said some time ago here, this is also seen in the film. It's something that we see a lot in the clinical practice as well. When we read articles or where we listen to what I call daddy psychoanalysis or father psychoanalysis, which try to give a bit of an exterior opinion of the phenomenon. Of course, that's not my position, but we have to say that there's always some sort of panic related to that these psychoanalysts express, and you can see that this panic of the irreversible modification of the body based on transitions that resulted in a retransition. So there's this panic about the irreversibility of body transitions. So there's this idea that because they can access, they can write their trans identity. Ever since this trans identity has been better accepted in the medical and psychological community, there's been less suicides, greater satisfaction in the transition. And this panic has this idea that gender transition is centered on the modification of the body and not necessarily. Of course, there can be bodily modifications, plastic surgery, etc. But in my clinic, it's not the central issue, at least that I see for most of my patients. They don't want to look like a woman or look like a man, but there's something of the body that is being explored. This transformation, this symptomatic transformation, I'm thinking about a patient, a young patient, female patient, a trans woman. She was
mauvais corps.
She didn't feel very comfortable, not only in her body, but in the world. It's not just a matter of not feeling comfortable in your world, but in your body, but in the world because of all the stigma, all the pressure, etc. And the only way that she found to stand this world was cutting, self-harm. So she began these bodily transitions and adjustments, and she stopped cutting when she was able to transition, when she found another possibility of life for her body based on these modifications and these subjective inventions. Actually, this for me is quite important. It's important for a psychoanalyst to see, for example, Spinoza, which is a philosopher that most influenced me in my trajectory. He said that we don't know what a body can do. And I think that this maxim is, we need to share this with individuals who are transforming their bodies. And it's a great teaching, because if Freud discovered anything, it is that the object of sexual satisfaction is unstable and mutable. So genitality is not the center or the finality of sexual drive. So based on this genius observation that Freud had, then we cannot forget that Freud was a man who lived in Victorian times, in a time when sexual differences were as marked as possible. And the feminine issue was considered problematic. So how does psychoanalysis in general and the direction of the cure should not fixate the subject? Even if they are in a cisgender position, they should not fixate the individual in a male or female position. When we polarize this, that's why trans identity and transition is very interesting, because this allows us, even with cisgender people, it allows us to undo this polarization that are not only stereotypes, but as Butler says, there are inscriptions to the norm at the level of the unconscious that sometimes determine very unhappy lives, even in cisgendered people. So what I want to say, and I make a point of saying, it's not that trans people are ill or sick and cisgender are not sick. The history of gender is that it shouldn't exist, actually. Gender shouldn't exist. It's not a disease. It's simply a modality of existence, more or less happy or unhappy, of the subject. And this is true of any identity, and the identities that we call cisgendered. So it's important to rethink, and this is scientifically proven. I'm not going to extend myself in this matter, but this dégradé of body and identity modalities, we have a spectrum of them. So it's true that among our patients, and this has happened to me, we have trans people who had this obsession of the passing, of the transition, which would avoid certain humiliations that they are subject to. And when we are psychoanalysts, we have to accept this subjective position and how this person can find their own solutions. But I also want to talk about a text that's very important to me, a text that talks about the problem of passability or transition by Julia Serrano, the manifest of a trans woman. So she talks about the idea of regularizing bodies in the polarities and how these representations, these gender pressures, as we call them, the physical transition is a regulated and limited process by beings that select candidates in terms of their potential for integration post-transition. So if they want to transition, they have to be subject to the gender norms with whom you identify. So once again, you have to think of trans identity as if we think about trans identity as regulated by two polarities, this changes, or something that is always changing, depending on which one you choose, it changes your point of view completely. So I recall a trans patient who wanted to transition into a gender expression that was not hers at the moment. So she had to present herself cross-dressed as a man so she could advance in her procedure because her endocrinologist thought that it was not possible to become a trans person if you were not in accordance with what is expected of that gender in terms of clothes and presentation. So she was dressed very stereotypically in order to progress with her transition. So when I talk about the body of the symptom, I'm not talking about body modifications based on hormones or surgeries. I'm talking about modifications, which is a modification of the relationship that a subject has with their trauma. And this takes place through gender identity. I'm thinking about another trans person who wanted to maintain a certain fluidity between their gender. The name that she chose made sense to her. It did not evoke a masculine or a feminine identity. She did not want to have surgery or more interventions. She just liked to shave her bodily hair. That's it. So she didn't think she was born in the wrong body. That's something that's used a lot to justify gender transition. But in truth, it should only be justified by the desire of the subject. Your body is your body, as I saw in the exhibit that I went to. This body did not hate her body. She didn't say I was born in the wrong body. She was angry at the stereotypes, actually, and she would tell me she wanted to experiment with this body and follow it in the surprising changes that she experienced. If you can watch this movie, Our Bodies Are Your Battlefield. So it's evident that the existence of trans people are not reduced to passability or transitionability. This is what interested me in this study of the collective. And in this, the body becomes revolutionary. Our battlefield is not the trans body as a sacrifice body to the neoliberal imperatives. It's not a victim, slave to the norms of sex, and it's also not submitted to the mediatic standards of perfection. They are sorority bodies, they are militant bodies. There are bodies that do not divide, do not separate the singular from the collective in accordance to the logic of the symptom. So let's see one more time how the symptom acts. Why do we talk about collective symptom? What do we mean by that? Or what we mean by sorority? Not in terms of empathy. It's not empathy that I imagine the suffering of another, so I am empathetic. It's something that is based on your own body, that revolts itself in your body, and that wants to be with other bodies. That's what my experience with this book, Sorority, it was born with what I experienced myself, with some patients, some feminist patients that belong to the Me Too movement. Something of my body, I started to become very aggressive towards psychoanalysts who were not capable of listening or understanding the Me Too phenomenon, the trans phenomenon. Thinking about several psychoanalysts here. I can think of individually, I can isolate them. So I was very aggressive in my body. Gradually I started writing, and it became a book about a collective. I wrote it with several Tamia Ayush, Fabrice Bollez, Laurie Lofer, and others. We decided to form together to present this painful symptom of psychoanalysis now in France. So it's not something that I was empathetic towards the patient. It was my body that needed to express itself. So it's another modality for us to think about the social bonds based on trauma. My way of submitting myself and feeling, it was how I felt towards some psychoanalysts. It was the way that I dealt with that. But in any case, I left several institutions. I thought that there was not a lot of space for LGBTQIPN plus issues. So we regrouped and reformed in a different way. So a person's gender identity, I want to go back to this from the point of view of psychoanalysis, is not constructed based on an imaginary ideal process, but based on it is the consequence of the subject of social norms. So identity is a person's distinct trace, but I see it not so much as something of the order of the ego or narcissistic defense, a defense that blocks trauma, that represses the trauma, that does not want to see the trauma, but a body that brings the traces of trauma that repeats itself in symptoms. And it's the symptom that is responsible for the identity of the subject as a repetition, always modified repetition of the trauma and repressing the desire of the subject. So the symptom knows, the symptom is in relation to the unconscious desire of the subject, it is always marked by trauma. And the symptom, therefore, is fixed to a certain type of jouissance, which is more or less bearable. As I was saying, it's not trauma that has to be removed. We're thinking about transformation, so it can become a solution capable of keeping the subject in relation to something that used to be unbearable. Of course, not all cases are like this. Some cases may have issues with transitioning, but we also see other cases where gender transition is really an expression of a happy expression of the symptom. It's a way of dealing with their own trauma that maintains itself and puts subjects into collective engagement. The subject of the symptom reinvents the practice of the body that corresponds to their modality of jouissance. So identity has the modality of jouissance, what Lacan called not the identification to the ideal, not to that which I imagine I am. And this identification has something strange to it because in place of having this characteristic component of identification, it is an identification that we try initially to get rid of. So I'm thinking of this patient who in the beginning, a young trans woman who suffered sexual abuse, her cutting was a way of maintaining her unbearable symptom, but she went to analysis to stop doing that because it became dangerous. And then the issue of transitioning and etc. I'm not going to go into all the details of this case because that's not the point of our talk, but it is based on trauma that transition was able to place itself. It's not me by myself. I'm not someone alone who's deciding things. No, it is something that comes from the most singular of the subject in trauma. And that's why we talk about identification to the symptom, not of re-signification or the ideal construction of their own image. It is through this identification to the norms that the subject becomes free to express the jouissance of their symptoms. This jouissance can be expressed, can be lived, and can be inscribed in the social bond. So there's this relationship between the symptom inscribed in the body and the subject's political actions. Traumatized bodies become militant bodies. We don't find a cause for the symptom. It is absurd to think about family pathological, structural causes for gender transition. Of course, gender norms influence this, but there are zones of the unconscious that are open to contingency and invention of the body symptom. If bodies can, if all these people, at least that I've found in my clinical practice, have been very much abused, humiliated, treated as merchandise, which is something that we see in Isabelle Sola's movie. They are also a powerful battlefield, and if the battle is difficult, the joy of coming together helps them overcome all this. The symptom of making bonds. Freud says that he talks about psychic contingency, something like the traumatic social, and I'm repeating myself, it's not a collective trauma that will smother this idea of the collective, that will this social traumatic that will end and smother all these individual nuances and subtleties. My hypothesis is that this traumatic social dimension can be transformed. It can become a powerful weapon for the fight or the battle. So this is what I call sorority, or the symptomatic contingency, or the traumatic collective. We are taken, they come together based on their own traumatic coordinates. And there's something unconscious and part of the body that is at play. We don't become sisters through our intellect. It's not rational. It's something that goes through our body. Sorority exists through signs that are not symbols of an alliance, but of the return of the traumatic repressed. These signs are confused with revolutionary symptoms, and the transvestites in the movie, they share with the feminists a revolutionary symptom characteristic of our time through which we become sisters, and this symptom is expressed in the collective expression. So all these different bodies with different traumas and socially, individually transformed bodies that have jouissance in collective engagement through their happy symptoms and sororal symptoms. That's what I have to say. Thank you very much.
Wow, excellent.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Silvia. This was a tour de force, truly very inspiring. It actually brought to mind a quote that's always troubled me in a generative way, and on which I've been stuck for several years. I'm putting it in the chat. I tried to put it in all three languages. It's from Guattari's Three Ecologies. And in English, it's rendered that individuals must become both more united or more in solidarity and increasingly different. And this has been a provocation for me as a psychoanalyst who works often with trans patients and somebody trying to understand the link between the clinic and politics. But I think your work provides some coordinates that can take this question further, because you give us a way to think about how the concept of the collective, or in another sense, the universal, could be based in something that is of the excluded, the not all, such that it won't be captured by the logic of the phallus, the father, as you say, and repeat the same phenomena we see so often in groups, masses, packs. So I want to simply, as we open up this time for Q&A, give that note of gratitude for your providing these precious ideas about how we can step forward with this question. So for those who were here and want to speak, raise a question, we don't have a lot of time, but feel free to use the raise hand function if you like. You can also put something in the chat, and we will try to monitor that as well. Do our best to translate.
Et je vais répondre à la fin. Comme ça, on prendra toutes les questions et je vais répondre à la fin, si vous êtes d'accord.
I'm sorry.
I want to receive all the questions at once and then answer them all at the end. So I'm going to listen to all of them and then answer all of them.
Lovely. Everyone heard that? So we'll receive all the questions and then Silvia will respond all together at the end. Okay, so not seeing any raised hands yet, but feel free to go ahead when you feel ready to speak. Okay.
Eliane e Alexandra.
Buongiorno.
Buongiorno.
Grazie. Silvia. Parabéns. Muito
Congratulations. Thank you very much. Thank you for your excellent exposition. I had so many questions here, and I was thinking about prostitution, the issue of trans men, trans women, but also prostitution, which is the oldest profession in history, and how these bodies can be thought in this logic that has been constructed. I imagine, for example, I I have a clinical practice, and when they get dressed up, as they say, in their own words, and they take on a different identity, how they are absorbed by this identity in prostitution, and they lose a will to live within that identity. So this is something that occurred to me. I wonder if you could talk about this in the end. Thank you very much.
Oi,
Alexandra.
Alexandra.
Obrigada, Silvia Lippi,
Thank you, Silvia Lippi, for what you brought to us today. It's very interesting. Could you talk a little bit more about the idea of the revolutionary being and frame this concept in terms. Sorry, we had an intervention. How you think about this in your work?
Bah oui, je vais déjà commencer à répondre un peu ce que j'ai dit,
So I'm
Alexandra.
gonna
Eliane.
go ahead
Donc,
and
oui, oui,
start
c'est vrai
answering
que
some
vraiment
questions.
la question de
Eliane
la
and
coexistence,
Alessandra. It's
vous avez pris
true
l'exemple
that
des Guattari, bien sûr. Moi, j'avais dit
the
Nègre
example
aussi,
that
vraiment,
you said,
c'est vraiment la base de
Guattari's
toute forme
example.
d'anarchie.
I also talked about
Et
Negri,
encore
who's
une fois,
the basis of all
ce qui est
anarchy.
intéressant, et c'est quelque chose que je suis en train de
And what
travailler
is
en ce moment,
interesting
c'est vraiment l'idée qu'en
and something
même
that I'm
temps,
working on at the
tant que nous
moment is
pensons
the idea
différent,
that
en tant que
at the
psychanalyste,
same
nous
time, when
avons un
we
peu cette
think
reflet de penser que c'est
differently as a
l'altérité, comme si
psychoanalyst,
nous
we
sommes
have this
complètement dehors,
reflection, like
non?
this reflex
C'est-à-dire
of
moi, je
thinking that it's
suis
an
une femme
alterity, as if we're completely on the
cisgenre,
outside.
donc je
So I'm
dois
a cisgendered
presque
woman.
comme
So
regarder
I,
une personne trans comme
it's
ça, presque
almost as if I had
comme
to
rien.
look at
Je
a
suis
trans
complètement,
person
je suis différent, donc je suis
from a
dehors.
position
Donc
that
c'est un peu
I'm completely different. I'm from the outside. I
humble
cannot
vis-à-vis de ça.
dare
Donc
think
ça, c'est
about
une
this.
attitude un peu,
You have to be
c'est
humble
déjà
in front
bien,
of
moi, je veux
this
dire,
person.
plutôt que milieu un peu. Mais je pense qu'on
Okay,
rate
that's
quelque
a
chose
good step
d'important.
forward,
Et
but we
pourquoi
can
vous avez
take more
cité à juste
steps.
titre
There's something
Guattari,
more important
et je pense en
because
particulier à l'Antidipe aussi. Et ça,
I
c'était aussi
quote
là. C'est
Guattari
lié à
and
mon
I'm
expérience, par
thinking
exemple, sur les
about
autistes. Que, évidemment, si on pense à la psychanalyse
my
comme quelque chose de
experience
complètement
with
autre, la folie chez
psychosis.
les autres.
Psychosis, we think
Voilà, moi, je
about
suis
it
là,
something
humble.
completely
Non,
other. The
c'est quelque
madness
chose de moi.
belongs to others.
Donc, moi,
Here
quand
I am
j'écoute
humble
les personnes
before
trans,
madness. No, it's
il y a
something that
quelque
is
chose
within
dans
myself.
la
So
différence,
when I
mais
listen
aussi
to
avec
trans
la diversité.
individuals, there
C'est
is
ça la sororité.
something in the
C'est-à-dire,
difference
c'est
that is
vraiment,
going to
c'est
awaken
partir
my
où
trauma
tout
in
en
myself. That is
acceptant le
what
différent,
sorority does.
tout en l'acceptant en tant que différent, parce que c'est
So
réciproque. Qu'est-ce
accepting
qui font les
myself
psychanalystes
as different and
pardon,
accepting the other
ils
person as
n'acceptent
being
pas
different,
leur
it's reciprocal. What
possibilité
do
d'être eux-mêmes
psychoanalysts
trans.
do? They do
Ils
not
ont
accept their own
particulièrement.
possibility of
Freud
them
l'a toujours
themselves
dit.
being
Oui, il le
trans.
disait
In
avec
some
les
part
termes
of
de
their
son temps. On
unconscious,
est tous
Freud
bisexuels.
always
Hein? C'est
said,
déjà
with
beaucoup.
the
Hein?
terms of his
Rappelez-vous
time,
qu'on est à
he
l'époque
said that we are
victorienne.
all
Donc, ce
bisexual.
qui veut
That's
dire
already a lot
qu'aujourd'hui,
for his
si
time.
on
He was in the
retrouve notre
Victorian
identité
times.
naissante,
So
elle vient d'emblée. Et il y a tout de suite cette
it's
transfert
not that
social.
this
À ce
trans part
point-là,
is going to
on peut
appear
penser différemment la
immediately.
différence.
It's something
Hein?
that we can,
Pas, encore une fois, comme une
it's a way
altérité
of thinking
absolue, comme une sorte de
differences,
position
not as
humble
an
vis-à-vis du trans,
absolute
qui au fond sont une position
alterity
très supérieure.
and that I am
Parce que pour
humble
moi, quelque chose de supérieur
before
qui
the
semblant
trans
être là. Ça
person,
va pas, cette
because
idée-là.
it's still a very
L'empathie.
superior
Non,
position
c'est
that you put
simplement
yourself in.
les
We
faire
don't want this idea of
self-discover,
empathy.
laisser
We want the
venir son propre
idea
expérience.
of
Donc, c'est cette façon-là que Deleuze-Guattari a
letting
très
your
bien
own
compris,
trauma
Guattari en
appear.
particulier d'ailleurs, parce que
And
c'est au
this
fond Guattari qui est
way
à
that
l'orgue. Hein.
Guattari and
Deleuze
Deleuze, and
n'était pas
Guattari in
fou.
particular,
Il faut dire les choses comme elles sont. Il y avait une fois
Deleuze
qu'il n'y allait pas.
wasn't
Alors que
so much on the
vraiment
edge,
être avec
Guattari
les
was.
psychotiques de l'abord, c'est être, permettre sa propre
Being
identité,
with
qui est toujours une
psychotic
forme plus
people
émancipée.
is to allow
La
your
forme
own
psychotique
madness to
d'existence est
exist.
plus émancipée que la forme
The
neurotique. Hein? Parce
psychotic
qu'il y a quelque
form
chose
of
de l'inconscient
existence is more
assez ouvert. Il n'y a pas
emancipated
ce
than the neurotic
conflit,
way of feeling.
refoulement qui nous
The
caractérise.
unconscious is very
Donc,
open. They don't have this
les transferts
repression
avec des personnes
that
trans, les transferts
can
vers
ruin our
trans,
lives.
ça permet de
Um, So the trans allows you to open this repression that we are always dealing with. It's the same thing with the importance of this transition, of this body that is transforming itself. It's very difficult in psychoanalysis. We are obsessed with identities sometimes, and we always think about the mirror stage, the ideal of the ego. And Lacan gives us this phrase that announces an impact in his teaching. And he says, reality. A student of his said, you talk about a person with a symptom, but it is this idea in which all transitions happen based on the body, but it doesn't matter how, in what format. This is the encounter between cis and trans, because each person transforms gender in their own way, even if they don't change identity later on, but they had to go through this gender identity process. I had a lot of patients, cisgender person, who are very obsessed with identity. They're blocked in that format. I don't know. I'm thinking about a patient who she earned more than her husband, and that was something that bothered her because she wasn't supposed to earn more than her husband. So there's little things like that of gender identity. And another patient came to me saying that he was afraid that her son was a woman, and then this patient saw that all the women in the family had always been very subdued to their husbands and had this very hysterical symptoms. So she was able to see how the gender identity formed in her family. And so these bodies, they are revolutionary when they come together. And for me, I live in a very LGBTQIA community. So there are people everywhere in my life. There are several people. So outside of my clinical practice, I'm also always dealing with the community. And this is a revolution. The fact that we can, not in the sense of a revolution with ideal chief of the revolution. No, there's small revolutionary groups and dispersed elements. So let's think about the Me Too movement. In Italy, the problem is feminicide. In France, it's much more sexual abuse and incest. In Latin America, there are issues related to racial and colonial issues. So there are different ways for different focal points, revolutionary focal points around the world. This is revolutionary for me. And so the more I am connected to this, I feel connected to this women of the movies because I have my traumas related to gender identity. It's not because we have to be the same, but it's because we each have our own trauma. And that's why men can also be brothers. Identities don't have to be exactly the same. Women in Italy say, I will never talk to a man. I can never talk to men, to cis men. So we sort of exclude them a little, but the idea is to be able to think about the inclusion, and this is where the revolutionary aspect comes in. Each one, each person has their own position and each one has their own modality of the revolution. I don't participate a lot of manifestations. The most important, yes, but I work a lot in my office. I see the protests walking down the street here of my building, but I do it my own way. I talk to psychoanalysts. Other people will do it in an institution, working with women who have their own issues. Other people will create institutions that work with children who are transitioning. Each person can work in a different position. We don't all have to do the same thing. Revolution comes from the fact that we trust one another, we trust our sister, our colleague. So I have a colleague who transitioned when she was 7 years old, and she works with children who are facing the same issue. So each person has their own way of working with these issues. We do not have to think about the collective based on stereotypes that we are used to. We can be in an institution. I left the institution when it was not as collective because it was the power of the physicians, of the doctors that they ruled and the psychologists had to adapt to them. So I left. So there's something that's very important to me. When I carried out an intervention in the United States, I was very happy because there were no French people. I'm Italian actually, but nobody spoke French. And this was very important for me, not because I hate French people, but because there's always a French person when we have a psychoanalytical encounter, and he's always Lacanian. And it's revolutionary for us to remove this that we are used to about what we are used to. We talk about the center of the phallus of the father. That's the problem. The deterritorialization, as Guattari says, decentralization, roots that are spread out, multitudes of negri. There are ways with which we can rethink psychoanalysis today based on this modality, decentralized modality in which it can exist. That's it.
Thank you, Silvia, Jed, and thank you everyone for your questions. To close our event today, I now hand it over to Benoit, who has a quick announcement to make. Benoit, over to you.
Sim, só queria dar algumas rápidas informações. Como a
I
gente
just wanted to
começou
give some quick information because we started a little bit later. If it's okay for you, Silvia, can we extend our conversation, which is so rich, so important, just a few minutes? Can we be late a little bit? Of course, of course. Before I give you back the floor, just want to give you some information. Tatiana, everybody understood that because of health issues, she could not be here with us today. But when she gets better, she is going to record their intervention and make their intervention available for those who enrolled today, who are participating today. So soon we will make it available. Another piece of information for those who are interested, we will have a series of talks that are called the Ateliers of Thursday, Thursday Ateliers. We will put the next dates in the chat. The next one will be with our dear colleague Jed, not Jeff, Jed Wilson, who will present us with 2 sessions with extremely interesting topic. And once again, I'm going to remind you, for those who are interested, we open our enrollment for 2 new formations. This is the right time to sign up because there are limited openings. And Jen, Benoit, I have a question. Something of the trauma, she's trying to read the question. Something of the trauma also unites the oppression, cis heteronormative oppression. So this is a very, very good question. What is trauma effectively? It's very difficult to be exact because I make a difference between my position and Butler's position. She's a very important person for this issue, of course. They opened this pathway for all of us. My difference
dans son idée aussi de la performance des genres, il y a toujours quelque chose comme on sait déjà qui
in their idea of gender, there's always something that we know what is the agent of trauma, the heteropatriarchal world, normative world, the norm. There's the norm who is at blame. From the psychoanalytical point of view, of course, we can say that the hetero, cis, patriarchal, etc., is at blame, but that's very generic. When we listen to our patients, there we have the singular. We listen to the singular. There is something that we cannot name. In a certain way, there's another way that we react to this heteronormativity. That's why we cannot say that the norm is a trauma to everyone. Each person has their particularity. That's why I make a point of thinking about trauma as singular. And on the other hand, we have sorority. Which is something that is truly collective. Because each person is different, each person has their own trauma.
De la situation de la psychanalyse, pour moi, c'était presque traumatique, le fait que, d'une manière de traiter les femmes.
My journey through psychoanalysis was very traumatic in terms of the way women are treated with 40 men, 3 women. The idea that you have to be like a man to speak in public. So my way of talking with other feminists, the way that I started was with the symptom of aggressiveness. And this is very singular. And I encounter with others and we share something. So repression, which is different from other forms of group, because other groups are formed with the repression of the trauma, where you don't want to see the trauma. The law of castration, it is there to guarantee to groups of brothers so that the trauma doesn't emerge ever. So sorority is the opposite of this. It's the trauma that can become a symptom, and we are going to make something of it. That's why politically sorority is so important. You can participate in any group, and that's what I talk about in that movie. Sorority, in trans movements, they fight for ecological issues, feminist issues. There were women who there was a conference by some important Black figure, and they were all white, but there was this Black person with the racial issue, and they also fought for that as well. So we don't talk about the problems of a group as being united and unitary. But for example, at the parades, the pride parades, you have all types of picture. You don't of people. You don't ask them, "Are you straight? Are you gay? Are you bi?" etc. Everybody comes together, and it's not questioned. So, from the point of view of psychoanalysis, there isn't an abuser of the identified trauma. You need to let the singular find its own form of transformation, and sorority as a collective bond that will allow the return of the repressed, the return of trauma, which is against repression, because we know repression causes a lot more harm than anything else. Fascism, of course, is a return of the repressed. So in sorority, it's interesting this direct identification, trauma and symptom, while in masses, there is an ideal subject and the other. And this mediation comes back when the all-powerful father cannot sustain his position anymore because there is this singular that comes back. I'm thinking about the Second World War in Italy. So there were soldiers in their singularity who suffered, who had their angst, who did not want to go to war anymore. They're not in the position of the Mussolini. The singularity destroyed the war effort in Italy. So the traumatic, it combats fascism. But if we continue in this modality of social bond based on the idea on castration, the phallic, the father, etc., then we are destined to make fascism come back. So you can see you can see the continuity between Macron and Trump. If we don't understand this, of course, they're not the same thing, but there is a continuity. There is a continuity. I'm sorry to interrupt you. It was very good to hear you. It was an excellent exchange of ideas. I can see somebody who raised their hand, but unfortunately, we cannot get any more questions. Our translators are already here more than an hour, so we must let them rest. But I hope we have the opportunity to have an event together again at the IIP. You are more than welcome, Silvia, here in our community in the Institute. It was a very important moment for the LGBTQIPN plus movement. Thank you, everybody who were here today. Thank you, Fernanda and Maya. Thank you very much. And to all of you who are here in the behind the scenes, we put information about everything that has happened in the IIP in the chat. Together we are stronger. Have a great weekend.